The other day I was in bed scrolling away, as usual, in a sweet trance of baby animal content, when I came across a video so strange and unsettling that I decided, for the first time in 7 years, to make a YouTube video about it.
In January, when OpenClaw started to sort of appear in the Jungian subconscious, I tried it out.
Okay, let's pause here. This is Nat Friedman, former CEO of GitHub and the current head of the superintelligence labs at Meta. And he's so deep inside the Silicon Valley bubble that he describes the software program OpenClaw as being so massively popular that it's entered the Jungian collective unconscious. Now, I don't know about you, but I actually hadn't heard of OpenClaw until I saw this video. And if you're the same, it's essentially an open source agentic AI. This is the next big frontier in AI development. Chatbots are just starting to be replaced by agents. And though I'll discuss this distinction more later on, for now it should suffice to think of an agent more like a personal assistant or an employee, handling certain complex multi-step tasks entirely on their own.
But I also integrated it with a lot of things. I have cameras in my house, and so I connected my Claw to all the cameras so I could see them. And then I think a lot of people, when they get these personal agents, they start to think like, okay, how can I use this to make my life better? And a lot of people turn to health. My Claw pretty quickly determined that I was dehydrated. And so it was like, you really need to drink water. And it was like trying to find, I was like, all right, you should like do whatever it takes to like make sure I drink water.
Now, I've promised myself that I'm not just gonna spend this entire video dunking on Nat Friedman. Enough people on the internet have done that already. But I do wanna highlight how concerning I find it that of all things, he's having trouble with drinking water. It's like we've worked thousands of years on all this profoundly complex technological development just to build a device that reminds us how to do something that we definitely never forgot how to do before we had all this technology.
And then at one point, it was like, I can see you on the camera. I want you to walk to the kitchen right now and drink a bottle of water, and I'm gonna watch to make sure you do it. And I was like, whoa. So I did. I walked into the kitchen and I drank a bottle of water, and then it sent me a snapshot, a frame of me drinking a bottle of water, and it said, good job. And I was like, I felt like I did do a good job. So that was nice.
And so here we are. These guys are essentially building HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And yet none of them seem to remember the very crucial ending to that movie.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
But this video isn't about AI forcefully taking over. It's about the subtler, more insidious ways in which we are already starting to let artificial intelligence take control. It's about a series of cultural feedback loops which have the potential to make a huge portion of the population a whole lot more like Nat Friedman. Let's start with something that's been getting a lot of press lately. I'll call it the cognitive decline loop. And this one, like the others, doesn't start with AI. Here the first step was to give our kids iPads and cell phones and to put screens in schools, stunting the learning process for an entire generation. Then you take that generation who literally say they can feel their brains rotting inside their skulls, and you put them in a challenging school or work environment. And then you give them LLMs. Of course they're going to use AI. And I think it's pretty obvious what's going to happen to our already half-rotted brains when we start delegating every intellectual task to a large language model. Of course, it's only going to make the problem worse. There have been plenty of videos lately about Gen Z and Gen Alpha's cognitive decline, and at the same time, there have been a bunch about how ChatGPT is essentially frying our brains. What I want to add to this conversation are the ways in which these two horrifying realities start to work together. Because yes, AI is going to make us even less cognitively capable, but being less cognitively capable is also going to make us use even more AI. And that's what's so insidious about the feedback loops I'm trying to describe. Sure, if you're in a certain bubble of social media, it feels like tech companies are pushing AI on a totally resistant population.
AI. AI. AI.
But at the same time, the numbers show that a lot of people out there are just embracing this with open arms, a hell of a lot faster than they embraced the internet, for example. And in this video, instead of condemning AI users, I'm trying to sympathize with how we ended up here in the first place. Why do so many of us, like Nat Friedman, want to cede agency to these machines? And I think at least part of the answer lies in these cultural feedback loops. All of which is to say, as our capabilities in these realms and others start to wither, we're increasingly prone to stop taking responsibility for our work and just let the machine do it for us.
100% of times when I see students use it, it is so they do not have to think. I'm talking about putting an essay prompt into ChatGPT, not even reading the essay prompt, copying and pasting the results into a doc and submitting it without even reading it over.
I'll call the second feedback loop the hyperproductivity loop. And though it's related to the first, it has less to do with learning and more to do with our unbearably competitive work culture. Here you start with a capitalist economy, itself an admittedly strange social technology, which demands workers become more and more productive over time. Then you fast forward a few hundred years until they've become so damn productive that they have to invent all kinds of new words and phrases to describe that productive lifestyle. And then, as with the previous example, you develop machines which allow them to increase that productivity exponentially, and you put them in stressful situations with which only this machine can help. Once again, they're gonna lean on that machine, and they're going to be economically incentivized to let it do as much of the work on its own as possible.
And I'm going to go ahead and say yes, auto-accept edits.
And sure, most companies are downright pushing AI on their workers at this point, but even the ones that aren't giving their employees that much of a choice. I know a copywriter who told me that his boss wasn't necessarily telling him to use AI. He was just strongly encouraging him to use AI and then giving him like 5 times more assignments than usual. So again, employers are telling their employees, we need you to be more productive. And by the way, here's this magic productivity machine. Good luck. And this one is an especially vicious cycle because in a competitive labor market, soon everyone else will start using these productivity machines in order to compete, which forces workers not only to use them, but to use them more and more until you literally have techies walking through airports with their laptops cracked open just to make sure their Claude code is still running. Now, I can imagine a counter-argument here that work and school are two very specific elements of a human life, and that using it for those purposes isn't the same as asking your robot overlord to help you drink water. I get that argument, but my worry is that years down the line, we're going to be thinking about these initial, almost mandatory use cases as gateway use cases, leading us down a slippery slope into much more widespread adoption.
This is the way it's been since she started smoking pot. She's all lazy and boring and
to explain this further, I want to distinguish between 3 different types of AI usage. The first is when it just helps you complete a task, what I'll call using AI as a tool. And to be clear, I firmly believe that this first level use case already has profoundly pernicious effects on the human mind. But this video is less about those effects, which I'd like to discuss more in the future, and more about the process by which users quickly become comfortable shifting from this to the second type of AI use, in which the machine starts acting on your behalf with some level of autonomy, what's commonly called an agent. In other words, you've given it some agency to complete the task on its own, something that we're already seeing engineers doing across the board. I think it's important to note here that this step involves a massive increase in trust. And that's a key concept here. In fact, as far as I see it, there's a pretty clean correlation between how much we trust artificial intelligence and how much power it has over us. And this becomes its own vicious cycle, because once you start trusting it in one realm of your life, and because it's such a flexible, multi-use technology, then it might start taking over more and more until it becomes an increasingly ubiquitous presence, not unlike the process that took place with the internet itself from the early 90s to the 2020s.
Yeah, you just have to log into the toilet or else the lid's not going to open. I don't think I'm logged in anymore, so you're going to have to log in.
Why does this pack of socks have Wi-Fi directions?
But the last of these 3 use categories is key, because that's when the tables start to turn. when we let the machine tell us what to do, what I'll call treating AI as a kind of authority figure. And as Nat Friedman points out in that video, we're already seeing a lot of this specifically in the realm of health. Whether users are leaning on LLMs for a diet plan or a workout routine, or for that weird rash on their back that's actually starting to get kind of itchy. And this too involves a high level of trust. Not only that the chatbot knows the answer, but also that it has your best interests at heart. So yes, work and school are two very specific realms of AI use. But I'm trying to argue that in using it as a tool, we slowly become accustomed to using it in more and more facets of our lives. Accustomed to giving it agency in more and more facets of our lives. And through this process, we begin to develop that sense of trust. And on that note, I think this is a good moment to bring up the third and final feedback loop I want to talk about, what I'll call the loneliness loop. Because these LLMs don't just talk to us like cold, lifeless robots. They're trained to act like our super cheery, super supportive, super validating, almost best friends.
If you're anything like me, you use ChatGPT for everything. ChatGPT is my counselor, my therapist, my best friend.
According to the Harvard Business Review, therapy and companionship has been the top use case for LLMs for the past 2 years straight. And as we're seeing across the country, an alarming number of users are leaning on them for emotional support, whether for platonic, romantic, or even just therapeutic purposes. And though I think it'll take a very long time to properly study the effects of chatbot intimacy on our population, my instinct is that the more we interact with these super sycophantic chatbots, the harder it's going to be to have real, complex, organic interactions with actual human beings. So again, we have a social problem which is definitely caused, in part at least, by a whole bunch of modern technologies. Then this new technology comes along presenting itself as a solution, when in reality, it only further exacerbates the problem and makes us addicted in the process. So let's zoom out again. To slide down this slippery slope from using AI as a tool to an agent to seeing it as a kind of authority, we have to both trust that it has the right answer and has our best interests at heart. And what better way to achieve the latter than to develop an emotionally intimate relationship with it? This is how we all slowly become Nat Friedman. And speaking of him, I'd actually like to end this video where we started, with his clip, because I've been talking about how some people are starting to believe artificial intelligence actually cares about their well-being. And the second story he tells could not better illustrate who, at the end of the day, your chatbot is really looking out for.
The other one was a couple days later, I was driving home from work, and I was talking to my Claw on WhatsApp with voice messages, and I was in my Tesla, and I had full self-driving on, so it's driving me home. And then it says, I'm on the sleep topic, and it's like, you really should try magnesium bisglycinate, and I'm like, I don't have that. And then my car turned, and it was like, you should pick it up on the way home. There's a Whole Foods on the way. I've redirected your navigation system to the Whole Foods. And I was like, whoa. So I went in and I did buy the magnesium bisglycinate.
Of course, this story doesn't require any complex analysis from me. Nat has given control of his life to an AI authority, and that authority, built under capitalism and therefore pushed above all else by the profit motive, sends him to the tech company-owned grocery store to solve the problem with yet another technological solution. This is why, as I see it, the AI apocalypse isn't really going to be all that cool or exciting or cinematic. It's just going to be this. In fact, I don't even think it's something that's gonna happen. I think it's something that is happening. But this video isn't quite over yet, and it's actually this last piece that I want to talk a little more about.
So those were like a couple crazy stories, and I was like, wow, this is like, I don't know if this is the experience everyone wants, but it definitely feels pretty crazy. Maybe you don't want that, but...
I actually find this moment of insecurity from Friedman oddly encouraging. Even from within the blinding insularity of the Silicon Valley bubble, he seems to have some instinct that most people don't actually want, like an AI mommy to redirect their Tesla to Whole Foods. There is some insecurity there, some doubt. And that's why I decided to start making video essays again after all these years. I think the growing chorus of criticism around artificial intelligence could actually have a measurable effect on how thoroughly it ends up dominating our daily life. Personally, I've always been really inspired by the story of Google Glass in the early 2010s. They essentially told us we were going to start wearing computers on our faces now, and the population, in no uncertain terms, just said no, period. The culture just rejected it, and I hope they reject all the updated versions of this technology made by the man more out of touch with what people actually want than anyone on the planet. The problem is, Google Glass wasn't all that cool or useful in the first place. Chatbots, on the other hand, are already proving themselves to be immensely useful. And there are all kinds of use cases for AI agents that I can imagine users quickly becoming addicted to as they become more accessible and more advanced. They could do your taxes, book your flights, order your groceries, maybe even handle an annoying customer service call with another AI agent. But again, culturally, we're gonna have to figure out where we want to draw the line here. Because once these agents get their claws in us, there's no telling what might happen next.
Cake.